Welcome to 10-8. 10-8 is a more personal and journal-style series of articles by myself that will center around police management, criminology, and policing. The articles will not be the typical citation-driven essay style that I use. For those articles, please see my Medium page, published books such as Amazon, especially The Business of Policing, Volume 1, Crimes and Punishments in the 21st Century, or scientific published literature highlighted by The Business of Policing, Volume 2, Managing Ethical Police Conduct. Here I will post frequent thought streams on my personal philosophies. Thanks for listening in. Police Sciences. Homo Thugs. I cannot believe this is the title of an article recently published in the leading peer-reviewed journal Criminology. But here it goes. I was a homo thug. Now I'm just a homo. Gay gang members' dissonance and persistence. Desistance and persistence by a professor from the Department of Sociology and Criminal Justice at Old Dominion University. Though I could not believe this was a real article, it is not that bad in content after reading it. Here's the abstract, though. In a growing body of research, the methods of and motivations for gang desistance are being investigated, spurred in part by concerns about the long-term negative effects of gang membership. Despite recent calls for scholarship that is more inclusive of LGBTQ populations and attentive to issues of sexual identity, however, most gang research remains overwhelmingly heteronormative. In this study, I use in-depth interviews with 48 self-identified gay male gang members to explore how and why they have desisted from or persisted in their gangs, as well as explore how desistance or persistence has affected their self-perceptions, lives, and activities. Because not all have left their gangs, I examine the markers in young men's narratives that signal shifts away from, but sometimes also toward, their gangs, as well as zigzagging paths out of the gang involvement. As gang structure and composition hold importance for their members' experiences, I use a comparative approach by contrasting men in predominantly straight gangs with those in gay gangs. Set within a heterosexist cultural context, the structure of the gang combines with individual shifts in identity to encourage pathways out of straight gangs and pathways into continued involvement with gay gangs. It's the end of the abstract. Now, I know what I write isn't good, but why is this so impossibly hard to read? It obviously doesn't sound like it makes any sense. The article's title came from one of the participants, Gary, who left his gang and stated, quote, I was a little homo thug. Now I'm just a homo, unquote. As many things are in the world of published literature, I find it a little odd that the author would misquote the person in the actual title, leaving out the little part. I'm just always so curious about what leads to making those decisions. Well, I wonder a lot of things about the scientific literature. For example, why say desistance and persistence? Who speaks that way? If you do not know, they just mean should I stay or should I go, to leave or not leave. Just say that. The article discusses the factors leading up to gay gang members leaving their criminal gangs or sticking with them. The weird vocabulary of the literature contributes to why people do not read or understand these papers. You should not need a PhD to read this stuff. It is an epic fail from the people who should be interested in education. In any alleged science, we need to look for funding and incentivization influences. Here, the author thanks the Racial Democracy, Crime, and Justice Network and states that the efforts were funded in part by the University at Albany's Initiative for Women. A study of gay males paid for by the Initiative for Women is something I simply cannot explain and can only wildly hypothesize about. Throughout this research, and a lot of other research for that matter, there is this presumptuous claim that I just cannot get on board with, and this is that who you screw is relevant to these subjects. The author outright claims that quote, integrating these various elements into research allows for a more nuanced and intersectional understanding, unquote. I would be more comfortable with distinctions that arise naturally. If we find out that sexual preference comes through as an accusatory factor, then okay, but I have never seen anything remotely approaching that. The paper looks at participants who are either in specifically gay gangs and gays in apparently straight gangs. The participants come mainly from 3 large gangs, gay gangs. You must prepare yourself, as the humor in the name of in the name of 2 of the largest gangs is impossible to avoid. The first gang is the BOB, which spells out Bob, and is an acronym for the Boys of Bang. Yes, the Boys of Bang. The second is the Firing Squad, and at least the third is the Royal Family. The author poses the question if gay gang members are a new frontier. I hate this kind of talk, and it is very conflicting with many principles people claim to have. Unless you hold some weird religion of intersectionality and supremacy that thinks gay men are truly different, you should assume that if one is born gay and gay life and beliefs are no monolith, they have been doing the same stuff as everyone else. Another issue I have a complaint about is the acceptance of social constructs into supposedly scientific narratives. The author notes, quote, I have never been a gang member, and I usually had a much different experience from participants based on my race, sex, class, and education level. How would she know that, for one? But a lot of presumptions there. But race is not real. It is not. I hate how it is allowed in scholarly work. If you weirdos want to identify with a bunch of strangers because of how someone in power labeled people some time ago in history, okay, whatever. Talk about that around the dinner table or in the National Enquirer, but it has no place in science. Towards the end, the author notes this herself, quote, prior research findings have indicated that gang/group processes may be more important than demographic characteristics such as gender, unquote. You don't say. Things that are real are more influential than things that are not. My God, stop the presses. Nothing but problems result when social constructs are treated as objective truths. In this research's demographics, some interesting aspects highlight something I ask you all to integrate into your review of the things you cite as evidence. Almost every time someone sends me some peer-reviewed research that they think proves a point about their ideology, that same piece of evidence contains numerous conclusions that it would disrupt their core beliefs and narratives if the research is credible. Here, there is an example. Remember, I do not buy into the narrative that race is an authentic influencer. The participant criminal gang member races are 81% black, 10% white, 2% Latino, 6% biracial. For such a low population percentage, the disproportion between the black population percentage and participation in criminal gangs is staggering. Additionally, the participants' education levels are shockingly high for many. 73% high school graduate or some college, 19% currently in high school, and 8% no GED. Basically, 92% of the criminal gang members have graduated high school. Many offenders stated conservative and nuclear family-based reasons and traditional definitions of manhood, granted with a variation in typical sexual preference, as what compelled them to leave their criminal lives. This is consistent with a lot of the other research I have seen and highlights the importance of local stability in a community, including the family unit. I do not think that a strict nuclear family is necessary. It is more like 2 people, one with masculine qualities and one with feminine attributes, working together to raise a family. Of course, there are exceptions. Of course. As was previously mentioned, the study contained some participants who were members of strictly gay gangs. The gangs who were comprised solely of gay members developed a strong us versus them mentality as another example of the objections I have with labeling people. The tribal divisions also made it more challenging for some gay gang members to leave. The author writes, quote, "They made it work. Their deep ties substantiated the effort. The kinship networks that gay gangs comprise complicitly the portrait for members who wanted to leave the gang." Unquote. The researcher quotes the participants in her interpretation of their dialects, and I find this, I guess, just odd. It does not sit well with me, but I am not so sure of the words to explain my thought. For example, she quotes them as everybody, ERRYBODY, and cuz, CUZ, instead of everybody and because. This is qualitative research, so researcher bias and influence is difficult, if not impossible, to avoid. But there is a thing that a lot of us that know that liberals do that just makes my skin crawl. The author actually states, quote, "In light of our society's heterosexism and homophobia," unquote, please just bear with me. I am going to speak for most straight males. Lady, we do not possess these traits. You do, and you are projecting it onto us. We do not care. And here's how she ends it. Well, first, let me say, she is actually doing decent work here as far as science goes. But she is clearly stuck in her narrative. Here's how she ends it. Quote, "Despite positive shifts in public opinion, heteronormative social structures that value heterosexuality and gender conformity over other self-expressions persist, and studying violence, crime, and gangs with an eye towards these structural forces will provide much-needed insight." Unquote. She is calling for more research based on gender. Why? She even notes in this research that gender is not a significant influencer on outcomes. Why? Well, her employment and identity depend on it. The author, quote, "is an assistant professor in the Department of Sociology and Criminal Justice at Old Dominion University. Her research focuses on how intersections of gender and sexuality shape individuals' experiences with gangs, crime, victimization, and the criminal and juvenile justice systems." Unquote. I feel we will be seeing more of this when I read another article in the same volume of Criminology. The title alone foreshadows the content. Quote, "Race and Policing in the 2016 Presidential Election, Black Lives Matter, the Police, and Dog Whistle Politics." Unquote. And the abstract to this paper reads as follows. A series of deaths of Black Americans at the hands of the police sparked mass protests, received extensive media coverage, and fueled a new civil rights movement in the years leading up to the 2016 presidential election. Both major party nominees campaigned on issues of race and policing in different ways. Drawing on colorblind racism theories and the history of law and order politics, we explore how views of race relations and the police were associated with voting behavior. We ask, on the one hand, whether people were engaged with the civil rights issues raised by Black Lives Matter, and on the other hand, whether Trump's expressions of support for the police functioned as a racial dog whistle to mobilize a particular set of voters. Using the 2016 American National Election Studies Time Series study, we find that concern about biased policing and support for the civil rights movement seeking to address it were associated with increased turnout among Democrats and more votes for Clinton. In addition, consistent with the dog whistle effect, claims of supporting the police were connected to votes for Trump, mainly those with high levels of racial resentment. We conclude by discussing the symbolic role of police in American society and politics. And that's the end of the abstract. I expect to hear conclusions in this article that are wildly substantive and completely unsupported by evidence. And I expect to see that liberal leaning on how America is bad and Americans are bad and black people can't even find ways to vote or some other those hidden soft bigotry of low expectations, like black people aren't capable of seeing through the bullshit as anybody else, or one of my favorites, that demographic graphics are somehow rooted and locked in, that if you for example, you're here a lot of let's just say democratic, because it's not liberal, terms are so messed up. But you hear a lot of them talk about how, oh, Trump wants to stop the Mexicans from coming into America because they'll vote Democrat. As if the Americans that are the liberalized Mexicans that they know reflect the actual Mexicans from Mexico. It's like they've never been to Mexico. I don't understand it at all. You're talking about strong family values based conservative Catholics. I mean, it's my kind of interesting that's how that goes. So we'll get to that report very soon. Let me catch back up to where I was. What were we talking about? Oh, the end of that abstract. So there will definitely be a future edition of 10.8 Police Sciences talking about that. To wrap up with this discussion, in the end, the author was unable to make any conclusions. This obviously does not surprise me, and if you have been paying attention, it should not surprise you. Who you screw is irrelevant. Those who live by finding importance in where each person falls on the sexual spectrum will always live in a disconnection with reality. A concluding note is that this self-reported information, which I always have problems with, I mean, my own research and it was interviews and technically self-reported, but my analysis was about looking for the things between the lines, not taking what they have stated at face value. Not that she has either, but anyway. Not really sure. By her own admission, she doesn't understand her subject matter, and my subject matter was what I'm intimately involved in my whole life. I was qualified to be a participant in my study, so I knew what I was talking about. She has complete disconnect. You guys don't like this gap here? All right, back to it. Found out where I was. My own research had those differences, but the one thing that policing taught me for sure is everyone lies. Then philosophical training got me to think about how, for example, you will never know the real me. No one will, maybe not even myself. The best that we can do is an authentic presentation of the person I want you to see. This may even be the real me, but it will only be a part of the story, the pieces that I let you see. This truth is central to why I am both tolerant of others and very open-minded. If you are attacking me, I know this is not the real you. That is the you that you are presenting to the world. This version of you protects the real you. I would rather you eventually understand that I am no threat to the real you. So I would prefer to avoid being offended by your attempts to protect your vulnerabilities. It is cool. I'm not here to judge or harm. And please don't forget, be safe, and please share these articles and videos. I get annoyed hearing people say share and hit the like and all that stuff, but you got to do it or there's no point almost in me doing anything. But that's a subject I've ranted about before. Don't need to revisit. Just remember, for these episodes, for the Police Sciences editions of 10.8, an item of science and peer-reviewed literature or technical aspect of policing will be explored. So look forward to some future episodes where I'll keep going over the types of literature, tactics, maybe a police shooting analysis or something that I see. I'll put out one of these special 10.8 Police Sciences episodes. All right, thanks.